Okay,
Like,
okay, here we are back. We're looking at H96. We have draft 1.1.
I have 1.2.
Oh, yeah, we did, but I didn't have it for some reason. I have just 1.1. Okay, all right, so Damien, do you want to, has this changed since last time we looked at it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I was with you the last time you looked at it, or if we've actually gone through the draft. There are some minor changes. The only difference between 1.1 and 1.2 is that in 1.1, I had inadvertently left in the executive director of the Human Rights Commission instead of the executive director of racial equity. So I just corrected that between the two drafts.
Right.
But there's only a handful of changes that you requested. And I haven't gone through them with you, but I don't know if the committee's already gone through them.
No, we haven't.
Okay.
So if you want to do that, that would be great.
Sure. Remind me, are you going to follow along on your own copy, or do you want me to share my screen?
We have them. We have 1.2 on our desk.
Great.
And I'm printing out what.
I don't have that in my desk.
So for the record, Damian Leonard, Legislative Counsel, the changes begin on page 5 in section 904. We've replaced the executive director of the Human Rights Commission with the executive director of the Romance Center for Independent Living, or designee. And then just for consistency in subdivision C and D, I've replaced a person with an individual, just so we're referring to an individual throughout rather than a person in two subdivisions and an individual in the others.
Yeah, I can't find mine, but
Mine was randomly defined.
Mine was right at the top.
1.2 anyway.
Wait, okay, let me check before
I'm sure mine is here someplace.
It's probably in your Friday folder, but I'll have Tony send us.
I have
Damien wants to share his screen.
I get confused about days because I never do my things by days. Let me see what. That. Okay. I just, while we're waiting here, I'm going to make a comment that I think that we all might have gotten this note from Wilda White about her worry about having VCIL, because VCIL is Vermont Center for Independent Living, and she her comment was that they really do not acknowledge people who have mental illness or psychiatric survivors. And did everybody get that email?
I did. I don't know that they don't acknowledge.
But you have to, in order for them to represent you or consider you one of their constituents, you have to acknowledge that you have a disability. And I'm not sure that that's what I got from her email, and I'm not sure that being a person with being a psychiatric survivor or being a deaf person is a disability. It's a condition, but I don't think of it as a disability. That was, I'm just sharing that she had some concerns about that.
I did not see an organization that has a broader charge.
Yeah.
Recommended. We're replacing the Human Rights Commission in here, which, you know, my sense was because they cover a lot of different issues that could be brought forward as a human rights violation. You would probably have to discuss needing an accommodation or having a disability in that context as well to get some kind of judgment.
I don't think so.
So what I guess I'm just wondering, like, is there a broader organization that works with people
I don't know
who
what,
identify?
yeah,
I had not,
Well, isn't there psychiatric survivors?
yeah, but then they're only psychiatric
Oh, I
survivors.
see, so, yeah.
Well, I think that we're never gonna get everyone, we're never gonna get it perfect, but all they're doing, thank you, all they're doing, I believe, is appointing.
right.
So,
I mean, I don't want us to speak for VCIL without hearing how they handle that issue, because it could be how they get certain funds and not necessarily just how they help all people.
yeah. Well, I can't think of another organization anyway,
Yeah.
so. I mean, I can't. I mean, there's Dale, but that isn't really that's aging and independent living, so that's a little bit different again.
Yeah, I don't
So,
think that's
I
appropriate.
just wanted to bring up her concern here.
Mhm. I just, like,
I-
when we talk about perceived experience, perceived disabilities, et cetera, I don't know that there's an organization that
Right,
does that work. That Vermont Center for Independent Living is people with disabilities working together for dignity, independence, and civil rights.
Wilda White is joining us,
oh, okay,
and so is Susan Aronoff.
And so is Sue.
Susan Aronoff from Vermont Disability,
Oh, right.
or, yeah. Okay, so,
Should we ask VCIL if they want to join today, just because I don't think it's good to talk about them without them
Yeah.
present.
They were able to weigh in.
Or would we ask Wilda if she has other suggestions?
Well, I guess
Good idea.
would we be basing that off of the idea that of something that we don't know from VCIL to be the case?
You're right.
We have a contact at PCIL.
I had reached out to the executive director. Let me send.
I'm forgetting who that is right now. You could Google it.
It's Sarah Monderville.
Oh, right.
we were just having this conversation, Wilda, about the email that you sent about your concern about VCIL. And we are trying to figure out how a broader organization that might encompass everybody that there. And I don't know that these 5 people are not going to be the people that are doing the hiring, or these are the 5 people that are gonna appoint the 7 people, and
Right.
hopefully they would, each of them, be cognizant of lots of differing voices that need to be heard. So we currently have the Director of Racial Equity, VCIL, a speaker appointed, a committee on committee appointed, and the Chief Justice appointee. So that's who we have right now, and hopefully, unless we can come up with a better organization than VCIL.
And unless I have the old version of the bill, I think, but unless the language has changed, it was a way to acknowledge that in the makeup of who we should be looking at to support, it says individuals with a physical or mental disability and the families of individuals with a physical or mental disability. And so my question is there an organization that better represents that category of folks that we are trying to serve? So that's the language that I still have.
So I think that's a question for Wilda. Is there a group you think better represents that?
No, I think that, well, I'll let Wilda speak for that, but I think that the issue is that it's a physical or mental disability, and that it has to be considered a disability, and so I would.
But that language is in there. I don't know that we've changed it.
No, we haven't changed it, and I do understand that we're probably not gonna get into that kind of detail, but I do think that.
Can you see if one of the pages has gone to the copy room to pick up copies of H-96? Because we're in a rush to get that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So, if you were gonna appoint a deaf person, for example, would they be considered a person with a disability? But that's getting in deeper than we need to, I think. So, well, then, do you wanna jump in here to our kind of rambling discussion?
As I understand it, thank you. My name is Wilda White. I am the founder of Mad Freedom. As I recall, this inserting VCIL in the bill came about because the Human Rights Commission wanted to be excluded from the bill for their own reasons, and
Right.
we inserted VCIL. My concern is really more broad, and that is that people who have, psychiatric diagnoses aren't included in this bill. And so that was my main point. Like, why aren't people with psychiatric diagnoses included in this bill? I don't know what is meant by mental disability, but it certainly doesn't encompass people with psychiatric disabilities alone. So that's the main problem. And then I didn't even understand that list of people or entities that you've listed in the bill as trying to actually encompass the full scope of people in Vermont who might be affected by this. Is that the intent?
No, I just, if I could clarify how I saw this come about, it wasn't anything different than what you just said, Wilda, but it did have a little more steps in between. There were certain populations that were spelled out as ensuring that those experiences and communities are represented. And right now that language, unless it's changed, says individuals with a physical or mental disability and the families of individuals with a physical or mental disability. We might set about to change that language, which is a bit of a separate conversation, but my point when we had an opening in the group that's doing the appointing is that so often people with disabilities or perceived disabilities are left out of it's a silent component of the decision making. It's an afterthought. And so we were trying to find an organization that best aligns with helping to ensure that we include those that were thoughtful of sub B around individuals with a physical or mental disability. Even if we change that language, I don't know, to say psychiatric diagnosis or something, it might behoove us to hear from BCIL, but I just can't think of an organization that has a broader charge that relates specifically to this particular subsection.
Yeah, I mean, my problem with VCIL, I think I said in my email, I think they represent their constituents admirably. However, I don't think they represent constituents who don't identify as having a disability, even though the larger society perceives them as having a disability. So that was my issue there. But I don't think they would necessarily do any worse than anybody else that you have on that list.
I guess that's, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the problem is with the list and its totality. And to the extent that you thought that you were including VCIL because you thought it was going to be sensitive to issues involving people who don't perceive themselves don't identify as having a disability, but are perceived as having a disability, I don't think VCIL necessarily fits the bill.
Yeah, right. I just don't know that there's an organization that I'm aware of that does do that work.
I think we're only talking here about 5 people, so I think we can't get too detailed about its.
Yeah.
We have to be pretty broad because, and when Senator Ram Hinsdale, when I'm looking at this now on page 3, the list of people who are specifically identified here, you're right, that's what it says. And I wonder if, anyway, I don't know that I want to get into changing that. I would like to, because disability, well, anyway, it is a a value judgment about whether it's a disability or whether it's just a difference. And the same is true with people who have different developmental delays or physical. It's, yeah, but I understand what they're getting at here, and it is not, maybe not value judgment might not be the right word, but just we assume that anybody who's kind of different than the way we define average or normal has a disability, and that is always bothersome to me. That we
They're just different.
yeah, and I learned that very clearly with the deaf community. They are not disabled. They're a different community, but I understand what they're getting at here. So.
Yeah. And that certainly speaks to the specific other institutions that we're trying to repair harm from. In the eugenics survey, people were labeled as feeble-minded,
Right.
you know, or other poor terms as well that were not based on any science. But I still think, as we just said, like VCIL is probably best as any other organization that traditionally serves people with disabilities to help ensure that there's people who are self-advocates, you know, and I just don't know what a specific organization that could take that place that has a broader charge for people with perceived.
Damien has his hand up.
And just 1 second, Damien, and it does, you're right, Senator Hinsdale, it does say other populations and communities that have experienced institutional structure or systemic discrimination, which could apply to all of those communities.
Yeah.
Damien and then Susan.
Actually, Susan had her hand up first, so
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll let her go first.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. For the record, Susan Aronoff from the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. So we've previously spoken about the concerns that I have about the word disability, because it can be a term of art, because it's limiting, because a lot of people don't identify and yet they're discriminated against as if they have a disability. I understand the committee's reluctance to change that term at this time to, you know, physical or mental condition. I did want to support Wilda, but just to put the committee, to give you some peace of mind, all of the disability rights organizations in Vermont, including Vermont Center for Independent Living, serve people who identify as having a disability or who other people are discriminated against because they have a disability or because they have a physical or mental condition. So with the exception of when you have to qualify for as a person with a disability for certain laws, you know, and really try to jump through a lot of hoops to be a qualified person with a disability, there's no disability rights organization in Vermont that makes someone identify as a person with disability before they would be, you know, served or welcome in the group. A lot of people have issues with that label. It's a label, not.
Well,
It's a legally operative language, and it's a label. So.
Right, and to be fair, it's the Vermont Center for Independent Living. I believe they made them, currently in our terms are as inclusive as possible in terms of how they label themselves.
Maybe one of the outcomes of this study will be that somehow we stop using the term disability and think about people with different conditions as opposed to, I mean.
But right, we have an Americans with Disabilities Act, and until that.
Well, we do, but it will never do
It's
that.
embedded in
We
many places.
We can, in our own minds anyway, understand the difference between having a disability and having a condition that's different than what people like to think of as average, normal, whatever. Goes without disabilities, whatever that is.
Temporarily able or something. I think I've heard since we all will be.
So Wilda, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I feel the need to set the record straight. I appreciate Susan Aaron.
You froze, Wilda.
Am I alive?
You are
Yeah,
now.
you're back.
You ended right at Susan.
Yes, I said I feel the need to set the public record straight because while I appreciate Susan Aronoff's comments, they don't reflect my experience with VCIL because VCIL actually refused to include me in a survey because I don't identify as disabled, even though I'm discriminated against because I'm perceived as disabled. And that was the reason I wrote the letter. I think VCIL is a great organization, but in this instance, they didn't feel like they excluded me because they said I didn't identify as disabled. And I think that's problematic. And I think the problem with the word disabled is not the word disabled. I think it's the ideology that I hear expressed in this room today, where you're putting at the center of your focus this concept of normal and average. That's the problem. It's not that we are different. We're all different. You know, there's the goal is to not make one identity or one ability the norm, right? So we're not looking for different words. We're looking to change the ideology.
Right.
Yeah, I get that, and I mean, we identify people as disabled, and if they, I certainly was disabled when I couldn't walk around on my own 2 feet, but that's a different disability. So anyway, I don't know that we can Senator Robin still.
I mean, I absolutely agree, and I feel like that's the reconciliation part, and the truth part is looking back at a history when people may not have been, you know, probably did not identify as having a disability themselves, or were not, you know, diagnosed with a disability, and based on really subjective judgment calls were sterilized or forced into institutions or, you know, other things. So we are looking at repairing past harm around perceptions of disability, perceptions that someone is incapacitated or cannot live independently or should not have kids. And that affected low-income people. It affected just a range of people who were labeled as feeble in some way, not to raise back up a slur, but, you know, it was not I just don't want us to go about thinking it was targeting people with disabilities. It was using discrimination against people's abilities to label them as unable to have children in some contexts or unable to be independently on their own. So I don't want that to get lost, that that's the truth part that we're trying to excavate.
Right.
And it you know, that's then the reconciliation comes with how we treat the people's range of abilities going forward.
Well, Damien?
So I just wanted to note, in our statutes, we use a wide variety of terms. We do say physical and mental condition. We also say use the terms disability and impairment. So I think if it would help to identify the community as individuals with a physical or mental condition, or individuals with a physical, psychiatric, or mental condition, or some version of that, to better get at this. I think that that's not going to change the underlying meaning of the bill. The physical or mental disability language was, your counterparts in the House went with that because that's what had been used in the apology. Not necessarily, I think, because there was a strong preference. And I don't want to speak for them, but I don't see from a legal standpoint, we're already saying communities that have experienced discrimination caused or permitted by state laws or policies who were individuals because they were individuals with a physical or mental, in this case, we say disability, but we could easily say physical or mental condition. And we could add psychiatric to that. And I don't think it would change the intent, but it may make the language more respectful and inclusive of the populations. And so if that's a direction the committee wants to go in, that's an easy change to make. And it would make it perhaps clarify the intent, but again, it's just, I just wanted to point that out because I just looked at our public accommodations law uses the term disability. Our Fair Employment Practices Act uses the term disability, impairment, and condition. And it seems to use them interchangeably, just depending on when it was drafted. The more recent sections use the word condition. The older sections use impairment or disability. So that's something that our statutes don't seem to prefer one term over the other. So for what that's worth.
So what if we change B on page 3 so that it said individuals with a physical, psychiatric, or mental condition and their families?
I am sympathetic to, I think Wilda, I could be wrong, but I think Wilda's suggestion from last week, which is that we acknowledge that I don't know if real or perceived is the right language, but I mean, so many people were sterilized or institutionalized based on someone else's perception that there was that they had a condition, you know, so I think Wilda made the suggestion last week that we add in real or perceived
Or dying.
what was it? Did you say something, Wilda, about a perception?
I did not suggest that you add in the words willed or perceived, no.
Okay.
I didn't.
So does that, if we change that language, I mean, we've made other changes here also, so it isn't as if this was the only thing that we would be doing.
Read it again.
So would that meet people's needs if we said individuals with a physical, psychiatric, or mental condition and their families?
Yeah, that's fine by me. I think that's good.
Okay.
If I may,
Yes, please.
Madam Chair, you know, this language that Damian Leonard explained, with what he characterizes the interchangeable use of disability and condition, I've always been told in Vermont that the term mental condition and mental disability, that they've been used actually to mean different things. That mental condition was used to reflect people who are not disabled by a mental maybe impairment, and mental disability has been used to characterize people who are disabled by it. And so I don't know how widely that's shared, but you know, you will see statutes that will use both mental condition and mental disability to try to capture both people who may have what we might call impairment but aren't disabled by it. So that's just a point of reference. I also think if you want to try to capture the broadest amount of people without doing harm to any of their identities, you might use both in this section by saying mental or physical condition or disability or something like that. Maybe not and or, but use both the condition and the disability language.
Okay, so we could say individuals with a physical, mental, or psychiatric condition or disability and their families.
Yes.
That covers everybody. Okay.
Okay, good.
And I will say that about what, Anthony, 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we did the respectful language bill, and our statutes are riddled with disrespectful language. But the problem is that as soon as we went through and changed it, then some of the terms that we changed it to became disrespectful. So it's really hard to, would that meet everyone's needs here?
Yes.
Susan, well done. Okay, great. Okay,
Okay,
good.
it's
All right.
changed.
Thank you.
Yep.
So you want to tell us the next change that we did? Oh, and then I would suggest that we leave BCIL there just because I can't think of any other organization, and hopefully these 5 people will be smart enough to look at the list of communities that they're supposed to be addressing and respect them. I don't know how else to do it exactly. So. So I think the next changes were on page 6, Damien.
That's correct, Madam Chair. So what I've done is I've added, I've made a couple of changes here. The first is to change who calls the first meeting to the individual appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And that used to be the Executive Director of the Human Rights Commission. And the second, this is language that the committee was discussing but hadn't made a choice on, and it says that the individuals are encouraged to appoint individuals to the selection panel who include members of the populations and communities identified at the beginning of the chapter, and who are diverse with respect to socioeconomic status, work, education, geographic location, gender, and sexual identity. And I took that language from the Health Equity Commission. And again, this was just language the committee wanted to think about, not language that you'd made a decision on. So it was to try to, if you remember, the concern of the committee was that there was no standard at all for who would be on the selection panel. And this was an effort to sort of put some general guidance around it.
I think this is
So,
a big improvement.
Committee, are we okay with that language?
Yeah.
It's on page 6, and I think that was, that's pretty broad, but it really says you should think about these things.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Yes.
Okay,
It
everybody
beats-
okay with that?
Mhm.
Everybody out there in the netherworld,
Well,
is that what it's called?
Ether.
Ether world? What's the netherworld then?
The netherworld is like,
Dead people? Oh, I mean,
it's
okay,
Hades Town, honey.
I
Yeah.
didn't mean to imply anything like that then, so in the ether world.
I think you can just say out there in the ether.
Okay, out there in the ether, are you all okay with that language? All right, I don't see anybody jumping up and down. Thank you, Richard. Okay, on to the next one then.
The next on line 14 and 15, we just corrected, got rid of the reference to the special fund. So it just says amounts appropriated to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The next change occurs on the top of page 8. The exact same change to the language.
In terms of criteria for stuff?
No, it's.
No, to the appropriation
Oh,
to
okay.
the Truth and Reconciliation Commission instead of the special fund that doesn't exist anymore. At the bottom of page 8, subdivision E, we've changed the public hearings here. So hold one or more public hearings to provide an opportunity for members of the public to meet and ask questions of the finalists. And so this was changed.
Right.
I'd have to look back at this, but this is getting away from the public interviews and the public comments.
Yeah, this is good. I think this is good.
Anybody have a comment on that one, committee? Are we okay with that?
It's very like our judicial retention process, which is you hold a public forum, if people come to ask questions, great.
But we'll hold private interviews, which is
Yeah,
more like
which is more-
judicial
yeah.
nominating.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's the change on the next page, hold private interviews with each individual selected by the panel as for selection. And you'll notice I've renumbered the subdivisions, and that's because we got rid of the public comments, so the written comments being submitted about people. And so the only other changes are just relettering everything to deal with the removal of that section.
Damien, does that include the section that says that all candidates' names will be public?
Yes.
Okay,
So we removed
Okay,
that
great.
as well.
yep,
And going into the next section, the 3 commissioners selected by the panel, we've gotten rid of the advocacy requirement, the advocacy experience. And so it's knowledge of the problems and challenges facing the populations and communities and satisfy any additional criteria, but they don't have to have demonstrated experience related to advocating for those communities.
Mindy, are we okay with that?
Yep.
Okay.
And on page 10, we've changed the Senate committee to this Committee on Government Operations instead of the Committee on Economic Development.
Yep.
And that's for the report back. I'm sorry.
Don't work, but yep.
And going all the way down to page 14 with the executive director.
Wait a minute, you're way too fast.
Yeah, there are no changes until page 14. So,
Yep.
So page 14 with the executive director, we've gotten rid of the requirement that they have to have experience. I believe it was advocating on behalf of, I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but they had to have advocacy experience, and we've removed that.
Yep.
Any questions on that? Okay.
Nope.
And the final changes here, are there any more? That's it. Those are the changes. So I've got a clean draft that I can send you if you want to vote it today. Otherwise, I can just send it to Gail so that you can have it whenever you're ready.
Yeah, because there's really only that change that we talked about on page.
It's on page 3.
I would
Okay.
love to have us have the ability to vote it out today, if it's at all possible, because I want to make sure that we get it back over to the House,
Yep. I'm
because
ready
we've
to
made
go.
some changes.
A birthday bill. It's gonna be my birthday bill.
So Damien, we have a break at 3, and then we're doing the Springfield charter change at 3:15. So if there, I don't know if there's any possibility you can clean up your copy, get rid of your yellow and make that one change before then. And in the meantime, what I'll do is ask anybody out there, if you have any final comments, or, and you may not agree with everything we've done, but if you'd like to weigh in on where we are here, that would be great. So Susan, Wilda, Reverend Hughes, Coach, Richard.
Oh, Susan's the first thumbs up.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
I am still, I mean, I just want to say I am still struggling with saying just individuals of color. That is,
Oh, I thought we added something about
No.
that.
we have not changed it, and I did not give Damien or the chair a specific direction with new language. I don't know if anybody present has any further thoughts. I do think there is a deeper history of, there is a longer and deeper and more original history in this country of anti-Black racism experienced by fugitive slaves and descendants of slaves who came through Vermont, some who settled here. I think that's a different experience. I also am finding fewer and fewer people who just say individuals of color. So I'm just struggling with this piece right now, and I don't know if I have an answer.
If we can, I'd love to be able to get, if we have a
Yeah.
suggestion. I think on one of the, when I wrote, you had specifically said perhaps adding a category of Black Vermonters.
Or Vermonters of African American descent, or whatever you.
I think you can be Black and experience anti-Black racism that's based on discrimination against people who I think you can be impacted by anti-Blackness and not have a history of being African American in this country.
So what?
So
Got it, I get that, but what language would you?
Just like neighbors.
Does
Would-
Kevin or Wilda, does anybody else have an idea?
More. Just, we're looking at a broader or a more specific category, not broader, more defined category of other than just individuals of color,
Or who are assumed to be
well, people who are actually,
of African
Well,
American?
do you want to add the word black? Is that what you're?
that's what
I
you
might
mean.
add something like individuals who have experienced anti-Black racism and individuals of color,
Sure.
individuals who identify as people.
Well, I don't think you put in that they've experienced it, because that's the thing with all of these categories.
Right.
And if you
I
put that
wouldn't
in
say
for one category, you're gonna have to put it in for all the categories.
I see what you're saying.
You could just say,
You say black individuals are those of color.
Yeah, that's good enough for me for now, if anybody.
Do you guys anybody have a better idea?
Madam
I
Chair,
Mark?
Reverend Mark Hughes, Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, for the record. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Committee, Chair Stevens, and others. The observation is noted. It's not a new observation, and we've flagged that from day one, which is why, though we support this policy, we've never viewed it as being relevant to the work that we're doing, which is why you'll see us back with the reparations bill for the third biennium next year. So there is nothing in this policy that really ties that connection in, and that's okay. It sounds as if Chair Stevens and those who put this policy together, and I think if I recall, even in Chair Stevens' testimony, this was a follow-on to the eugenics policy that came forward. And if I'm not mistaken, and Chair Stevens would have to speak to this, I think there is intention on the House side to come through with a reparations policy at a time of their choosing on the House side.
Right, and we're not dealing with that here,
Yeah,
so.
We're asking about language, Mark, on page 15. Oh, whoops. no.
Allison, I can do it. I can.
Madam Chair, I'm tracking the conversation. I'm completely aware of what you're talking about. And what I'm doing is I'm providing a position on where the alliance is on the absence of that language.
Okay, thank you. Coach, did you have a suggestion, perhaps? You've heard the concern?
It's fundamentally it's a problem that I'm not sure we can really define, and that's what makes it, a little difficult, to come up with that category. I've seen within my own family members, because of skin tone within the family, be treated differently and assumptions made. And a lot of that are those, to look at the science side of it, there's gene skips. When you go to my mother's side of the family and you actually see one of my aunts who clearly has Native American features. Well, we know through our gene search on that side of the family that we're connected to the Georgia Cherokees. So, when you start looking at, the overall focus, of this bill, it is about truth and reconciliation for all of these disenfranchised populations, all. And when you notice the emphasis on all, because anyone who has been harmed, over time, needs to have their truth presented. And so, you know, let's keep working on that definition, because I'm not sure you're going to get a truly clear one.
So, thank you. So, Senator Romney, I wondered, oh, there you have it.
Oh, yes.
The crows.
If you, yeah, the crows.
They're
If you,
flying.
if, I know that you mentioned slavery, if you had defendants of slavery and other individuals of color, that very specifically talks about people who were descendants of slavery and who had that whole thing, but it also includes other individuals of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was either going to say individuals who identify as Black or people of the global majority, but descendants of slaves and other people of color is also fine.
Anybody else have thoughts on that in any way?
I have thoughts.
Well, share your thoughts.
I think Richard Menard has not spoken and he raised his hand, so I would defer to him.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't see you, Richard. Go ahead. You are muted though. You are, there you go.
Okay. My name is Chief Richard Menard. I'm Siskiyou Abenaki. I'm a Native American in the Abenaki community. I listened to what you're talking about, you know, being people prejudices of that nature. We continue to see that every day, even though a lot of my tribal members are white in color, blue eyes, blonde hair. Once the word gets out there in Abenaki, they're discriminated against. I mean, I have every hit in the local schools in our local community. And, but that's the younger generation, and we're working on trying to resolve that. But with the older generation, which I'm part of that, we have a lot of the older people hate to come forth because of the eugenics that hit us back in the 20s and 30s. And a lot of the older people are real silent, you know. I know they're Abenaki because I've done their genealogy and checked them out, but they still won't come forth and admit that. That's something we're going to have to work on. But I agree with, you know, Wilda, you know, where she's saying that a lot of things need to be looked at. And I don't know if you classify the Native American as a people of color or not, but they blend in a little bit easier than a Black person, that's for sure. But I don't know what the answer is, but I just hope that you get this bill through and we'll do a little bit of truth and reconciliation to the Native American people. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that, am I echoing? There is a specific category for Native American or Indigenous. So what we're trying to do here is just address the issue of individuals of color, or do we want to be more specific and also identify, and I might be wrong here, but I'm thinking of descendants of slavery or other individuals of color, because we have the experience would have been very different if you were just
well, being more inclusive is better.
I guess
and directed.
Yes, I never want to publicly disagree with Representative Christie on anything, so I'm actually not sure if we're agreeing or disagreeing, but inclusive to me means that we acknowledge the deep harm that was done historically in Vermont by having a Supreme Court justice who owned slaves, having people who owned slaves, you know, in Vermont while it was outlawed, and how that has impacted, how that has caused societal harm in a different way than impacts on other people of color.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at there.
Yeah, That I'm,
And I think we're saying the same thing.
okay, good. That makes me feel better. So I was like, I don't know.
So,
God forbid the co-chairs of SEC disagree.
so if we can change that C to descendants of slavery and other individuals of color.
The term descendants of slavery makes no sense. What does that mean?
I was gonna say, did we say descendants of enslaved people, or
But that
do
includes
we, I was
the
looking.
Egyptian, I mean, that includes
Descendants of
centuries
slaves. That's what I was,
in America. I mean, otherwise
I mean, descendants of slaves, isn't that, or is that not?
oh, that's,
I heard you say descendants of slavery.
Oh, I meant slave.
Yeah.
It says
Good point.
not-
Well done.
because we're all descendants of slavery, right?
yes.
But we are
actually,
descendants of slaves.
Should we say descendants of enslaved people? I just don't wanna.
Okay, that's fine.
dehumanize.
However we do that, but it isn't of slavery, you're right.
Okay, I'm not gonna put my historic hat on and talk about all the people in the Roman Empire who were slaves. Because otherwise then you're including a whole group of people. We're talking about America.
Well, we are taught, it does say in Vermont.
Yes,
It is very
good,
clear.
Good, we're
It's
qualified.
very clear that these are people in Vermont, that we're not talking about the world here, we're
Yeah,
talking
good.
about Vermont.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
just wanted to be on the record as saying this is precisely the issue that we sought to address at the onset of last biennium, as well as the onset of this biennium, because in order to talk about the work that needs to be done addressing slavery, we've got to talk about slavery, and we also have to talk about reparations. We have to talk about what that means. So that's the reason why we intentionally sidestepped H96, even though we saw it coming. And I'm here to support the policy to get it through. But as far as the this work being attributed to descendants of slavery, in terms of the folks that are our constituents and the folks that are looking at these policies, we never intended on being a part of this. It never came out of our community. And the only folks that I know of who thought this was a good idea at the onset of this were our legislators. So we support the policy, but as far as this apparatus being suited to address that particular issue, we strongly disagree. This is not the apparatus to address that particular issue.
okay, any other comments? Okay, yes, Mr. Menard, Chief Menard?
Yes, the only comment that I've got to make is the Native Americans were also slaves in a lot of situations, a lot of them. And we've had them written in our own town here, so, which is in Swan. So I just want to make that comment.
Well, they would be included, we're not, yeah.
They're
Okay.
already included.
So I don't like the language. Well, let me back up. I think the term individuals of color, always when I read it or read it, I stopped on it. I find that kind of language extremely objectifying. I don't like that kind of language codified. I feel like you are reproducing and perpetuating the same kind of oppression and discrimination that the bill is designed to address. I don't feel that the words you're using, descendants of slavery or slaves, is any better. I think you should say what you mean and mean what you say. And if you're saying that people who had Black skin or were discriminated against, you should just say that. But all this language, it's all extremely objectifying. And I find it all very problematic.
That's where I am too, but I'm trying to figure out with sort of a limited thought partnership, in this space, how to how to do a better job. So
I don't have a suggestion.
Okay, I've just Googled it. Better term for people of color. And there are some interesting things. NPR did a whole piece on this.
but okay, just first to Wilda's point,
Yeah.
I think there is a difference in terms of anti-blackness or that being an original sin of this nation. And then getting to how to identify people of color.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people now in Vermont are saying people of the global majority. I don't know that that's any.
Yeah,
I don't have any idea what that means.
Or racialized
What I
people.
said before about black individuals or other individuals of color.
Or
Yeah.
So
racial,
that color part,
I think
don't know
that-
how to eliminate the color part, because that's,
or racial minority.
No,
no, because.
because that
No.
isn't,
Yeah.
we're talking about Black Vermonters,
Yes.
other individuals.
I think I'm gonna just say,
I think individuals who identify as black or other people of color.
I don't think it has anything to do with identity. It's how you are identified. These are labels.
By other
This
people.
system is about labels. It's not about how people identify.
Yeah.
it's about how they are identified by others.
Exactly.
Well, normally if people are black, then they're perceived as black. There's no missing it.
I was trying to align it with the rest of the language where we allow people to self-identify.
But that hasn't been a privilege of having black skin. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Remember the context in which you're doing this bill. You're talking about trying to ameliorate racism, which is not about individuals. It's about a caste system. It's about objectifying people. It's about property.
Okay, so we need a better term.
So black individuals and other people of color.
Yes.
Black or African American?
No, she said, okay, let's just, no matter what we come up with, somebody is gonna be unhappy. And
Right.
and maybe nobody is gonna be happy. But we just have to settle on something. And I think that Anthony and Keisha right now have Black individuals and other individuals of color.
Fine, let's do that.
Those are the individuals, and then it's identified as the individuals and the communities in which they exist. And that's defined later on, the communities in which they live, so. Does that,
That moves us forward.
Damien, are you there? Hopefully we haven't sent him off in a,
No, I'm still here.
okay,
Yeah, I've got black individuals and other individuals of color in
Yes.
there. So
Yes.
I can send this right over to the editors and be back at 3:00 if the committee's ready for me
We're
then.
3:15, I think we're starting. We're
yeah,
breaking at 3.
Oh, okay.
we might be, yeah, we'll
What
be
time is
break,
it in Springfield?
yeah.
Madam
we're
Chair?
gonna- Yes,
People lined up at 3.
I had offered some additional recommendations for the bill, and I don't see them reflected anywhere, or I didn't hear any conversation about them either.
I actually don't remember your,
I remember the ones about AI. I don't remember the one.
I think I showed up for testimony and also had an offline conversation with Representative Christie about some of these recommendations as well.
and so what are they?
The first one is the use of the term discrimination throughout this entire policy. The term discrimination in our statutes, it's used in Title 2, 3, 5, 8, and 9. And it's never quite used in this particular context. And I quote, "The process of dismantling institutional structure and systemic discrimination." And that use of discrimination in that context is problematic throughout this entire policy. Again, what is systemic discrimination? I think in most instances, and I'd have to go to the Ledge Council on this, is where terms of discrimination are being used throughout our statute. In most cases, what we're doing is we're looking for remedy because they're civil in nature. The issue is civil in nature. Discrimination, what is systemic discrimination is the question of the day. And it seems that is prevalent throughout the entire policy. That's point one, and I'll just, if I could be allowed to go to the other points.
Yep.
The The next one is it appears in section 902 B3. In section 902 B3, it speaks of isolation of separate groups, and it speaks how that would not be condoned or permitted in this policy. So just trying to get one's head around that, when you would have multiple groups represented, but within the policy, there's this disclaimer that you would not deal with any of those groups separately. It seems to be problematic. And if I could continue, when I did testify, I recall specifically in section 904A, sections 1 and 2, that those dates were reversed. They still appear to be reversed.
No, I'm just gonna clear that up right now. They aren't reversed, but they're somehow, the way it's written, it looks like they are. If you look at number 2, the 5 people are to convene by August 1st of 2022, and then they are to appoint the 7 members by September. So it isn't, it is right. It is, the dates are right. It's just the way they're written. It identifies when the panel will be selected before the 5 people meet, but the dates are actually right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Continuing on, section 906B7. And I'm glad you reminded me of that, because for a minute, I started to believe that I had not testified. So when you reminded me of that, I recall being here. Section 906B7, there's, if I'm looking at the right one, it's words to the effect that regardless of whether the discrimination was intentional or adversely impacted the population or community, that sentence is incredibly problematic. There's a juxtaposition against its placing intentional discrimination and what adversely impacts something, so as to suggest if it's not so as to suggest that they are mutually exclusive. And if they are mutually exclusive, that's even more problematic. And I'll go on to
you have a recommendation?
I'm looking at,
I do not have a recommendation at this time, but I would recommend that you not state it this way.
I'm looking at B2, B7.
It's on page 12.
Yeah.
7, work in consultation with the populations and communities.
Is that what you're referring to?
It is 906B7. In the one that I'm looking at, I'm not sure if we have the latest one online, but the paragraph starts off: study, research, investigate, and report on the impact of state laws and policies on populations and communities identified pursuant to Division 902B1.
Yep, it's on line 8 on page 13.
If the commission determines that the particular laws or policies caused or permitted institutional, structural, and systemic discrimination against a population or a community, and here's the problem: regardless of whether the discrimination was intentional or adversely impacted the population or community. And then it goes on. So if it was intentional, we got other problems. But if it's not intentional, because it's saying or in that sentence, it seems like the other option would be that it would adversely impact a population. I would imagine that if it was intentional, it would also adversely impact that population. So I'm just struggling with that. I don't really have a recommendation. I'm not quite sure what that sentence was trying to say, quite frankly. But the way that it's written, it doesn't seem very helpful. Especially since we're talking about discrimination. That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do think that there is something to be said for using the terms systemic discrimination in here, because it's the discrimination that happens because of systems that are established, not because of individuals' biases. Because we can't control individuals' biases, but we can control the systems that create discrimination. And I think that's what this is talking about when it talks about systemic discrimination, about what are our systems that are in place that create discrimination against, or here it's very specific people, but against anybody. We have systems in place that discriminate against women. We have systems in place that discriminate against children, certain types of kids. So anyway, I do think that my feeling anyway is that we leave the term systemic discrimination.
From our perspective, from the perspective over here, you're creating a new animal because I can't find any place else where anybody speak. We talk about systemic racism all day long, but as far as the use of the term systemic discrimination in state policy, I'd just love to be on the record as just saying y'all are just making stuff up.
Well, there is systemic discrimination, and it wasn't just racism. It was against people who were considered feeble-minded, people who had physical disabilities, and so that was systemic discrimination against them. So I'm
just suggesting that this terminology does not appear in any other statutes, not the use of the term discrimination in this particular manner.
We are using it here very specifically.
That's noted, and I'm glad you allowed me to come and go on record as just being able to speak out on that, because I think what happened over in the House is that because there was a struggle in finding words or maybe not using others, that's what y'all came up with, and I think it's problematic. Thank you.
Thank you. Do other people have concerns about systemic discrimination?
No, I was just looking at its use in other contexts, and we are creating something new that has connections to other truth and reconciliation commissions and institutional efforts to repair policy harm and government harm. And systemic discrimination does at least exist elsewhere in European Union language, and I just wanted to make sure we weren't now referring to some phraseology that just is completely irrelevant. But I do see it used elsewhere to mean what we intend it to mean here. So I hear the concern. I just don't see it as like a complete departure from what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a really good term, because it does talk about discrimination caused by systems that we put in place and policies. So anyway, okay. Anybody else? Okay. With that, yes.
I guess as I look at that section, I'm like, don't want to split hairs again here, but, and I don't know how often this comes up, but there are plenty of instances where it was not the law or the policy on the book, but how it was practiced,
right,
that has a discriminatory effect. So I might say particular laws, policies, or practices. But again, I will live if that's not in there. I just think you could have something in law. I mean, we could say we have abolished slavery and still have people who effectively own slaves in the state.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's all about the
I'd like you
pros
to make
today.
paper airplanes of these and fly them to us like pros.
I'm gonna do that next time.
Good idea.
You keep talking about the crow thing, so I'm gonna do that.
Good.
All right. So committee, are we,
I think we're okay.
we're okay?
Personally.
So let's then wait for Damien to come with a clean copy. And we can look at it. And in the meantime.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
can I just clarify, are the only changes to the description of the communities that were discussed earlier, or are there other changes the committee wants?
I think only the black individuals or other individuals of color, however we decide.
Yep, and then individuals with a physical, psychiatric, or mental condition.
Yeah, the page 3.
And their families.
And their families, and that's it.
I think those are the only changes to the communities.
Okay.
Okay,
Any
Wilda?
other changes to the document?
Wilda? You're muted, Wilda.
I don't know if I didn't hear Damian Leonard. I don't know if I didn't hear Damian Leonard say the word disability. Did you say mental condition and disability or disability?
If I didn't, I should have said it. Mental condition or disability
Okay.
is the way it's phrased.
That got captured.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah, I wanted to make sure just that there are no other changes anywhere else in the document. So,
Anybody else have any changes?
No.
okay, those are the two.
Yep, thank you.
So we have 2 representatives joining us at 3:15.
Okay.
So if we could do it at, say, 3:45, would that work?
Well, or Damien, if you can join us at 3, we'll take our break now. And then if you can join us at 3. Does that
Sure.
work?